Welcome to the Girl Dad Show.
Welcome to the Girl Dad Show, a professional parenting podcast. Each month, I interview entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals who are balancing parenthood, life, and profession in the hopes to learn what it takes to be an amazing professional parent. Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Girl Dad Talk. I wanted to talk in continuation from last time about why we moved to Texas and just kind of recap everybody that, the big genesis of the move to Texas was really around saving costs. And the saving cost was one factor in achieving a goal. And the goal was to basically build a consulting business that allowed me to do a couple of things: work on projects that I wanted to work on and work with people I wanted to work with. And most importantly, work when I wanted to work with them. The main goal those goals were supposed to support was the idea that I wanted to be able to spend the time with my kids when I wanted to spend time with them. And this whole idea of controlling time to that level was the main objective and goal. And the conclusion was that I wanted to do that through consulting because I felt like it was the most possible way of achieving those goals. And moving to Texas was one of those things that aided in that because it lowered our cost of living significantly, allowing us to be able to test more things and try more things. And so we moved here and I started building this business. And the pandemic had been in full swing at this point. So most people were very comfortable with working remotely and very, very fortunate in that sense that, talking to potential clients and prospects, it was relatively easy to move to Texas during that time frame, given my whole network's been in the Bay Area because I was born and raised there. But I did do a couple of things to grow my network and try my best to build out a network here in Austin. But I will say that even now, I only have like one client in Austin. So I still haven't really figured out how to get a client here, but not that I'm actively looking for a client in Austin, but I would say that most of my consulting clients are still in the Bay Area and actually in New York. First part of it was very, very challenging. It was very, very challenging. Being a consultant is super hard and it is very hard for me. I struggled with it tremendously. It took me, I want to say, 3 months before I really figured out how to do it and how to like sell myself. And I don't even think I even sold it correctly until like 9 months later. And if you are interested in doing this, where you consult for a living and contract for a living instead of having a W-2 job, I would recommend giving yourself quite a bit of time to figure out how to do this because it's a lot different than working as a W-2. Like you're not selling a service or a product, until you actually design or develop it. And you don't really know what it is that you do or how you want to package it until you get a couple reps in and you figure out what makes you happy and what jives with you. And maybe you're better than me at it. So if you're laughing at this conversation and you've already know how to do this. But I struggled a lot with selling myself and not having that insulation of a product or a service or a brand that basically I was selling in proxy of. And it took me quite a bit and it was very, very scary because we were traveling across the country, moving with kids. We were spending a ton of money, trying to get the move to happen. And we also weren't making that much money because we had very few contracts and customers. It's also hard to do anything when you're a contractor, especially with no business history, because loans don't happen, banks don't lend you anything. Like you're not even counted as an income earner. It's really funny how the world works like that because you can't get a loan like a normal way, and it's really hard. It's really interesting. The short and skinny of it is that I think that we didn't really find our groove until about 6 or 9 months later, and then it started to finally click. Like, okay, we are now starting to understand how this operates and works. And I don't know how good of a dad I was during that time frame. I mean, I may have been a better dad in some ways and in some ways a terrible dad because I don't think I was achieving my goal of like being able to control when I work and how I work, because I think in the first 6 months I basically just took whatever contract anybody would give me because the need for money far outpaced my goal for working when and what and who I wanted to work with. And that urgency really drove the contracts that I took. I just took whatever I could. And as I started to learn and develop my skills and all those things, sales aptitude and what it is that I sell and what it is that I offer. Obviously it's become a lot easier. I mean, fast forward 2 years later, and I'm doing it much better now. And I can confidently say that I'm pretty good at controlling my time. It does take me a week or two to move things around, but if my kid wants to do Monday soccer's in the evenings, I can reschedule my week to basically accommodate that. Or I can move things around to go do this time in the middle of the day on Tuesdays and Thursdays to be there for something. Like it's doable. It's not like instantaneous, but I could, if you give me a week or two, I'm in the place where I can now control my time. But in the earlier days, I think I sacrificed a lot of that time to basically build up and make sure that we had sustenance and income. And so I wasn't necessarily achieving my goals until about 9 months or even a year later. But the first 6 months was really bad. And I do think that I did make up for it by just like sleeping less and just working a lot more and being there for my kids and then working at night. And so in some ways, I think I was a good dad, and well, at least when it comes to time. But I think that in some ways, I wasn't achieving my goals, at least of what I thought a good dad was, and I wasn't spending that much time with them. But I will say that it is highly worth the journey because, you know, I look back at it now and people ask me if I'd go back to a W-2 job or if I want it. And there is a possibility. There's a couple of companies that I'm actually very interested in and that I would actually engage, that idea of working full time. And because the product is super cool, the team is really fun. And I think that they would be very, very comfortable with me having this ability to navigate my schedule and time the way I want to. And those are the things that I basically wanted for consulting. And so by living this kind of life, I think I've been able to attract the companies and the W-2 jobs that can also suffice it, which has been really fascinating because I never would in my wildest dreams expected a W-2 job to encompass that. Um, and I think the big thing for me that I learned through this process, though, is that if you want something like this, like this kind of theoretical, like, hey, I want to basically, spend more time with my kids when I want to spend it. But I also want to work with people that I want to work with when I want to work with them, working on what I want to work on. It sounds very audacious and it sounds very theoretical. It sounds very theoretical and pie in the sky. But I think articulating those goals and making it specific and then putting some measurable tactical things in your roadmap to like track towards it really helped me achieve it. And so I talk about this kind of superfluously, but the reality is I was documenting the entire journey. I mean, I tracked every single hour that I worked. I just stopped tracking my hours just about like, I want to say 4 months ago. So for the first 2 years of consulting, I tracked every single hour that I spent, including sleep. So if I took a walk, I tracked it. If I spent it with my kids, I tracked it. If I did billable hours, I tracked it. If I did BD work, I tracked it. And just a high level of like discipline and rigor and just tracking hours. And every week, every month, every quarter, I would look back to see my hours allocation versus return on investment. And it sounds a little bit maniacal now that I say it now, but I think that that level of, specificity in goals and then specificity in tracking so you can actually see how you're measuring against it, so your progress started coming up with like timelines for me. It started helping me realize that like if I could do X and Y time in Z result during that last phase or that last quarter, I bet you I could hit these goals, by doing 10 more of these in this time frame in this quarter. And so it started to like change the way I think about my time and my goals and objectives. And so I was able to very quickly ramp up after that first 9 months into getting exactly what I wanted, which was having clients that I like working with, working on what I want to work on, when I want to work on it, and spending time with my kids. And it was a really great experience and it was really fun. I will say that year one was really rocky, but it was a great learning experience. Year two was phenomenal. It was super fun, and it was really amazing to be able to have that level of like confidence and control. And just like anything in life, I think when you achieve certain amount of success, or you achieve your goals, the human psychology just takes over, and you get used to it and you start to get comfortable, and it becomes the norm, and you need that next kind of like dopamine fix of achieving another goal. And that kind of unfortunately happened to me in the worst of ways, where I actually started to get very seduced by how much money I can make and what that looked like. And so I spent the latter part of last year optimizing for income. And I mean, obviously, there's a reason why I did it, but in hindsight, I would say that that was probably not um, part of the original goal. And so I did have to do a really big reset this year to realize that like I deviated from the main goal so much. And there's a reason for it, but like I said, like I deviated pretty hard. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to balance those two goals with the new goal that I have. And so last year I made a lot of money, and it was phenomenal. I made more money than I've ever made in my life, and we've been able to, do a lot of new things that weren't ever able to do before. We've been able to invest in other companies, and these other companies could have huge payouts in a few years that we would never be able to do previously. We've invested in real estate, and we now have three other properties, and we've already bought and sold a fourth. And that's really fascinating because I never in my wildest dreams thought I would have one, let alone three properties that I'm renting and having other people manage for me. And in the process of actually building out other businesses at scale. So one of the big goals this year is to launch a new company called Forever Young Stuff. And the idea behind Forever Young Stuff is, can I basically build, buy, or invest in service businesses and help them scale and grow and create residual, semi-passive income? And the reason being is this: my goals have now changed as I have changed and evolved and learned. I started to realize that I had the ability to start, organizing my life into goals and specifics. So that idea of like setting these goals, tracking my time taught me that I can optimize for goals and basically manufacture it. And so I started changing my goals and tactics. And one of the biggest things that happened to me was I met in one week two gentlemen, and randomly introduced to me by Peck, a wonderful friend. I've known him for over a decade, and he's an amazing guy. But he introduced me to two guys in one week: Noah Kagan and Eric Liu. And I met with both of them like almost back to back, and it was fascinating, right? Like it was just so fascinating to have two people my age just living and thinking about the world and life in such a different way. I was so proud of myself for figuring out how to do consulting and getting contracts and making a good salary while navigating my time and kind of playing this delicate balance and getting best of both worlds. And these two guys are just thinking about the world and life in such a different way, and they completely humbled me in the idea that you could even ask for more. Both these guys are fairly transparent about their income. I know Noah is because he has a YouTube channel that talks about his wealth, but they both generate just a ton of money very, very passively. And just a fascinating experience to talk to two people my age back to back. And so I started this journey of like trying to find other people that were like this, that had, a lot of passive income. And what I came to the conclusion was that there's a huge population of people that do this. And it's just something that I didn't know about. And so I spent, the bulk of my spring and summer researching and investigating and trying to meet as many people like this as possible. People that, had investments or were building unsexy businesses or service businesses or real estate investments, and people that just built passive income. And I got to meet a ton of them, and it was a really, really eye-opening experience because I started to realize that I could also do that using the same concept of hitting specific goals, tracking my time, and figuring out how to optimize for it. And that kind of led me to losing my North Star of controlling my time because I got seduced by it. I got seduced by this idea that like I need to go do this thing now where I already had what I wanted and now I wanted something more. And so the first thing I needed was money. I needed more money to basically reinvest into these other assets that could basically generate assets for me passively. And the first goal was to make more money. And so I had to increase the volume of consulting or increase my prices. And so I was trying to do two of those tests at the same time. One was I was trying to increase my volume. I just slept less. And then two, I was testing, different ways of packaging up the value that I could provide so that it could be more efficiently distributed. So, and increasing my rates. Luckily, this is like kind of the beginning of when all the employee rates were going high anyways, and so it kind of like had the tailwind behind it, and so that was a really easy transition because I was just kind of walking with the market rate, and that was a really nice um, perchance happening for me. And that was really the genesis for the ability to like have this capital, this working capital, to actually start testing some of these theses. So that was one goal, one new goal, was to increase the volume and the value of the consulting that I did, and that took a lot more time than I originally wanted from my goal previously. Second goal was to meet, network, and hang out with people that were doing this, right? This idea of like, hey, this is what you thought what you was going to make you happy before, and now I'm realizing there are people out there that just are doing things that I want, that are basically generating a lot of income with very little work, and they're using their mind and their money to generate income for themselves, and I wanted to learn how to do that. And there's something that my mom always said, growing up, and it's like, it's very common saying, but choose your friends wisely, or hang out with who you want to be like. It's that whole adage of like, you're the common denominator of the five people you hang out with the most. And so whenever I want to learn a new skill, or learn a new mindset, or learn a new business or thing, I just try to find, as many people that are doing what I want to do, and I just spend as much time with them as I possibly can. And so that became my next new goal, and finding these people and just spending more time with them, interacting with them, texting with them, hanging out with them, drinking with them, eating with them, doing whatever I could to basically engage them and, obviously provide them value, but even trying to figure out what would provide them value is time and energy in itself. And then spending that time with them is also time and energy in itself. And so you have now two time consuming projects that were monumental, the second year. And then the third thing was to actually employ tactics. So you're learning all these things that they do, and then you're researching it, you're soaking up their mindset, you're becoming the common denominator, and then now you need to take action, because analysis paralysis is the devil of all entrepreneurs, and you have to start acting on it, or else you're never going to make progress forward, because you're going to get so stuck on thinking about how to do it right, or if it's the right move, that you end up slowing yourself down, or increasing your chances of slowing it down or not doing it. And so I started employing it very quickly, but employing it also causes a ton of time. So executing on these real estate deals, or these investments, or these businesses is a very time consuming process, because think about like most people starting a business. I mean, that would be 70, 80, possibly 100 hours of their week, for maybe months, maybe years. And now you're trying to do that, plus hang out with all these people that do this regularly, plus trying to basically self fund your ability to go do that. And so needless to say, it was a really bad year, as for me as a dad, because I basically didn't spend as much time as I should with my kids, and I spent about 6 months of that doing these three things. And it's kind of embarrassing to say this to you guys in this episode, because I'm very proud of what I've accomplished. I'm very proud of the fact that last year, we made a tremendous amount of money, and we were able to buy a ton of real estate. We were able to start a few businesses. We were able to have a very successful. I have a very successful consulting business now, and just a myriad of different successes. But the reality of it is that I kind of woke up at the beginning of this year going, wait, did I do that at the sacrifice of something that was the main point to begin with? And it's like one of these things that I wrestle with all the time, because it's like, and I kind of wrestle with it with Amy, my wife, as well, because it's like this idea that like, if I could just do this, like just hardcore do this for 3 or 4 more years, I'm like confident that I could generate a lot of passive income, or at least semi-passive income. And then I could spend as much time as I want with my kids, right? Because I'll have semi-passive income. And so then the justification is, let's just go spend as much time as I can, focusing my energy and time on that. And then the reality, though, on the flip side, is that, well, then I'm missing, these parts of their lives, because I'm trying to spend time with them. And so why do you need to do that if you can just spend time with them? And it's that story about that fisherman. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that proverb, or that fisherman basically is fishing, and he catches his fish, and he feeds himself through fishing, and he sells some fish to get some other supplies, and he lives a pretty happy life. And this tourist comes by and says, hey, if you work a couple extra hours to get some more fish, you could use that fish to hire somebody and you can get more fish. And he said, okay, what would I do with that? And he said, well, if you can get that guy to run the boat for you, you could use that income to buy another boat and get someone else to do that for you. Soon you could have a whole fleet of boats, and you could have all these fisheries. You could go vertically, horizontally. You could build out this whole business, and then you could retire a very rich man. And he said, okay, so what would I do with all of that? And he's like, well, you could do whatever you want. You could do whatever you love. And he basically goes, but I love to fish. So he's like, the idea is like, do you always need to build something, big when, the end goal is already being achieved, right? And so I struggle with this a lot. And I'm being very vulnerable right now because I think it's really important that you understand the journey of my parenting and kind of building business. And I don't think I've ever really talked about it this publicly or openly, right? Like what I'm building, how I'm building it. I talk about it very openly to a lot of my newer friends that I'm trying to like hang out with as much as I can to soak up their mindset. And they're very helpful, right? They're very welcoming and helpful and supportive of it. But I don't really talk about it as much to, just general friends or people that I interact with. Because it's not a normal thing, right? And I don't think it's very common for these things to happen. And second of all, I also don't think it's that weird to, spend time away from the kids because you're working so hard or your job is so demanding. But I guess for me, it's like, I really want to make sure that I'm like balancing these two things well, because on the one hand, I have this idea that if I spend 2 or 3 years really investing my time into building these passive income assets, I really do feel that I could work very little and generate a very healthy income for my family, probably for the rest of our lives and our kids' lives. On the other hand, the whole point of doing that is to spend time with the kids. And so, like, how do I justify doing that when I should be spending time with them? The second thing that I really struggle with is this idea that kids are really, really um, happy and needing and loving of you, during the first like 12 or 14 years of their life. And they're still loving afterwards, but there's a natural occurrence, when they go into middle school, high school, where they want to kind of spread their wings and be themselves. And so, I could use that natural curve of, of growth and human psychology to my advantage and really double down now on time with my kids when they actually want to be with me and they're craving it, and then spend the time building and working later on when they're actually trying to be their own person and they're embarrassed to hang out with you, and then of course they're supposed to come back and be your best friend. But I struggle with that as well too. Like, do I just like ride the tides of the wave and put the tailwind behind me and use human psychology and development to my advantage? And so, long story short, I'm still figuring it out. This is by no means an answer to the solution. I'm just posing the conundrum that I'm in and kind of walking you through, the journey that I've been on over the last 2 years building this consulting business and moving into Texas. So I'll dive in a little bit more about some of the decisions that I've made and how I'm navigating this year in the next episode. But I hope you enjoyed this talk. And if you have any questions or thoughts or advice for me, I'd love to hear it. Please message me, add it in comments and social. Yeah, I'd love to hear it. So thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to The Girl Dad Show. Did you know that our website is full of really fun products like the shirt I'm wearing? Visit thegirldadshow.com to shop our t-shirts, hats, mugs, and more. And follow our social channels to hear about our latest sales.